people? It's Multiplier here. I feel like I need some sort of multiplier gang sign, like an M or something, but I'll work on that. But yeah, I'll work on that. So today it's all about using velocity to make your bass lines more expressive and more kind of dancey and more kind of groovy. So I'm using my track Sunday Night, which is still unreleased as of now, as an example, because I used this technique in it. Pretty good stuff. So I've soloed the kick and the bass just so you can really hear what's going on with the bass a lot more. And yeah, it sounds a bit like this, just for your reference. So yeah. So yeah, as you can see, pretty cool, but there's a lot of subtlety to it, which I'm about to explain in this video right about now. So what I've gone and done is, if you have a look in the MIDI right about now for the bass, if you have a look at the velocity lane, which is this guy down here, you can see I've got all this kind of different information in, and that's where a lot of the kind of subtle grooviness comes from. So the idea is, if you kind of compare it to real instruments, in real instruments, when you press down a note harder, like let's say you're on a piano, the harder you press, the more kind of sharp, I guess it sounds, more kind of accented it sounds. It sounds a bit more aggressive, and as of that, when you're playing the piano and you're getting in the groove, every time you press a note, you're playing it at a different velocity, the velocity of you hitting the note, and that's resulting in each sound sounding very slightly different. It's got a different sort of sound to it. And as a result, people who play the piano well end up incorporating a lot more kind of groove and vibe in something through the use of varying the velocity for certain notes. So the idea is to make our synthetic sounds, because this is a synthetic sound that was made in Massive, to make it sound more real and more kind of lively and energetic and dancey fundamentally, we need to kind of create this natural kind of grooviness by simulating the velocity, and you can do that all part of MIDI, because MIDI has velocity as a parameter built into it. So yeah, how do you set this up? So for example, how do you set this up and what sort of things do you do? So if we have a look at what I should do, I'll give you an example. So the bass sounds a bit like this with say medium velocity. Now we play at a low velocity and then high velocity kind of alternating, you'll hear that it's the same sound, but the higher velocity one sounds a lot more kind of accented, a bit sharper, a bit more grit to it, I guess so. A few more times, you can really, it's quite subtle, but it really does make a difference. See what I mean? Pretty cool stuff. So how would we program that into, say, Massive? So let's load up Massive. So quite a common way to do this is to map the velocity to the cutoff of, say, a low pass filter. So the velocity macro is down here. So you look at some sort of mouse effect and then you click it and then you choose what you want to modulate and then you click and drag just like anything else. It's pretty intuitive if you know Massive how that works. But yeah, as you see, if you look here, I've mapped the velocity to the low pass filter of, or the cutoff of one of the low pass filters. So if you notice how, or basically it does make a difference. Yeah, if I say turn off this filter, you'll hear the difference. So. And then what I've also done is map the velocity to this oscillator 3 in terms of the wavetable position and the amplitude, which isn't a super influential oscillator in the preset, but it still does make a difference and it just gives it a bit of extra something. So if we turn that off, you'll see what sort of difference it makes. And I'll turn it back on again, obviously. So there's some quite common things you can map the velocity to. Another one is the amplitude of the wave in general. Now, the reason why I try to avoid this, if at all possible, is it's a bit predictable. Like when you press a note harder on a piano, it doesn't just sound louder, which would be what raising the amplitude is. It changes the character. It sounds different fundamentally. Have a play on a piano if you want to get a feel for this. So that's why I try to always when I'm mapping the velocity to presets I'm making for a sample pack, I try to map it to things that would sound, that kind of make sense, so that if you imagine this was a real instrument and you hit the note harder, it would make a different sort of sound in that certain way, if that makes sense. What it's pointless doing is mapping the velocity to, say, something that just doesn't make any sense, like, I don't know, the resonance would be a good one. Mapping it to, I can't really think of a good one right now. But yeah, you know what I mean. Mapping it to the attack, say, wouldn't make a lot of sense, because if you press a note harder on a piano, it's not really going to change the attack much at all. And there's no point in, to give you a really stupid example, there's no point in mapping the pre-delay of an envelope to the velocity, because if you press a note harder in real life or play a note harder in real life, it's not going to affect the pre-delay of some sort of modulation. So yeah, definitely try and map it to realistic things, and that way when you're programming your velocities or you're recording your velocity stuff, it really does make sense and it sounds real. Because the idea is we want to, through the use of real subtlety, remember subtlety is going to be the key here, make a synthetic sound a bit more real, so give it a bit more character and a bit more movement, a bit more vibe. So in terms of actually, now you've set up your synth, it helps to kind of play on a keyboard, or in my case a push, to get a feel for it when you're designing the preset. But when it comes to actually then programming it in, you can either just record it, you jamming away at different velocities, like playing it like real, and then record it in, or you can literally just use the velocity laying down here and just kind of change the arrows up and down to where you want, do it manually. So what I normally find myself is I end up recording it in. That way, when I'm recording it, I'm in the moment, in the vibe and zone, whatever you want to call it. I'm playing the different velocities at a natural, groovy sort of time and way, but then I might tweak it afterwards. So once I then get that recorded MIDI, I might quantize it a little bit in places and tweak the values to make it, to fix my mistakes, basically, because I can't play it in perfectly. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to using velocity to make your synths more expressive, groovy and dancey. Anything else relevant, I should say? Yeah, I suppose it doesn't matter what instrument or synth you use, there will be a way to have the velocity. It doesn't have to be massive. Every instrument, every synth has velocity mapping one way or another. Now, how much choice you have in terms of mapping this velocity depends on the synth. Some synths are great for that, some aren't. So it's just a case of dialing it in for your particular thing. And yeah, that's it. Been multiplier, and yeah, this has been using velocity to make your shit more expressive and dancey and groovy and stuff. So enjoy.